Greetings to you. My name is Brabazon and I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to Vlog 108 on this rather windy day in Adelaide. And Vlog 108 is titled Information Literacy, and yes, this is the start of another trilogy. We're going to start with information literacy, then move through to a discussion of grey literature, and then finish off by exploring how and why references and referencing matters so much to examiners. Okay, well, let me tell you how I got here. In the last 5 or so weeks, I've been reading a lot of theses every single week. It's been quite intense, literally sort of 5 to 8 theses every single week. So I've been really immersed in the drafting process. And I have been concerned and worried about the referencing and the references that I've seen as I've been looking at this work. The date of references, the problematic referencing of that research. And for me, and this is the important bit I want to convey to you, referencing errors and issues are deal breakers when it comes to examining a PhD. When I see referencing errors in a PhD, that is a failed PhD. Tell you why. Remember, I taught for a long time, about 22 years, first year students. And if by the end of a first year course, a student couldn't reference, I would fail them in first year. So nothing you ever say will convince me that if I see referencing errors in a PhD, that's okay. It's not okay in first year. It's certainly not okay in a PhD. So therefore, before I deliver that sort of third instalment about what referencing and referencing errors mean to examiners when we see them, I wanted to start more positive and more buoyant and look at the positive side of this, and that is information literacy. Information literacy is the key characteristic of academic literacy and indeed academic integrity. We use academic integrity a lot, and a lot of different tropes and skills and literacies are within that, and information literacy, I think, is important to pluck out at this point. And look, we could focus on plagiarism, we could focus on collusion, and indeed we did some earlier vlogs on plagiarism. But that's very negative, and I really wanted to talk about the positive skill set that we can develop for you to alleviate these problems and also enable your career in a really positive way. So information literacy is the capacity to locate information, yes, but to understand the context of information, to reference and log it correctly, and also to be able to move it into your research with integrity and clarity. So that means, for example, you're not taking a reference and then sort of randomly applying it to a different context, almost sort of lying about what the original research was about. So it's understanding the context in which the research and information appeared and moving it with clarity and skill. So information literacy overlaps with a whole array of different literacies. Sometimes they're referred to as computer literacies or traditional literacies or technological literacies. It's all of those things, but it's also a lot more than that. Information literacy is a reasonably recent concept. The first reference I came across of information literacy was 1974. I'm sure my wonderful librarian colleagues out there will find me an earlier reference, but it was described in the sort of early to mid 1970s as a series of skills and techniques to use information tools to engage with primary sources. Okay, so since that initial use of information literacy, it's increasingly, particularly in the last 15 years or so, been aligned with social democracy, been aligned with citizenship. And what that means is we can't have a social democracy, we can't have citizenship unless our citizens are informed. They have information and the skills to understand and balance and weigh that information to make choices in our democracy. I'm not saying anything about Donald Trump at this juncture. There's also an ethics to information use, which is also part of information literacy, and we really can't have social inclusion unless we take information literacy seriously. So that's about citizenship, but for PhD students, Information literacy is absolutely everything. It is, if you will, the first step and the first stage when I'm assessing you if you have academic integrity. So that's how important this is. This is the first deal breaker. I open a thesis and I'm looking for information literacy skills. If they're not there, I don't bother assessing anything else. So I'm looking at, can you access information? Can you evaluate information? Can you use it with rigor? So for examiners, we're looking for your ability to access and engage with a diversity of sources and use them with multimodal awareness. Can you interpret those sources, or are you endlessly paraphrasing or overquoting? Are you analysing those sources? Are you using some creative flair in your analysis? And of course, most importantly, are you referencing those sources with respect? So is your referencing correct? I cannot tell you how important that is. You must provide enough information. The reason why referencing exists, to be frank with you, is so examiners and indeed scholars around the world can check your sources. We check the work that you've done and we verify your interpretation because you've given us enough information in the reference that we can evaluate it. Okay, so now that those basic definitions are in place and you have a sense of what examiners are after when we're looking for information literacy, let's now explore how you can get information literacy and a few quick tools and tips to enable that skill to develop for you fast. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about why this information literacy thing matters so much. It comes from the Latin informare, which means the imposition of a form. The imposition of a form. I find that really interesting. So you can see right from the start, the origins of the word information. It's about power, about something being imposed on something else. So we live, and it has been described for the last 25 years, we live in an information age. Information is everywhere. But what does that information actually mean? And how can we shape it and frame it and render it meaningful? So I'm really interested, sort of post-Google in particular, in the two parallel movements that exist in our time and place. Firstly, the extraordinary amount of information that's available for the digitally literate, but secondly, at the same time as information literacy skills have never been harder to attain. So we've got all this information, and yet how many of you at any point in your academic career have done a course or done even a part of a course on information literacy? So that is a fantastic paradox of our time. The problem, therefore, is not in Google. It never is in a search engine. The problem is a lack of information literacy you hold before you enter Google. So the strength and indeed the weakness of Google is just about everybody can find a little bit of information. We use our already existing skills, our already existing vocabulary to find stuff that we agree with. That's the nature of Google. So we're hungry for information and Google can provide it to us in nice bite-sized chunks. So if we're hungry for food, we go to a McDonald's drive-through. If we're hungry for information, we go to Google. But you see, the point of education, the point of learning is to challenge you, to question you, to agitate and shatter just a little bit the framework of meaning around you. And think about a PhD program. You're not just finding out stuff you already know. The whole point of this program is that you're challenging yourself, you're challenging the discipline to find an original contribution to knowledge. So using low-level information literacy skills are simply not going to get you there. So the problem is not in Google, the problem is not in any search engine. The problem is our vocabulary. Have you got the vocabulary and the skill set, the academic ability to put the right terms in? To give you a great example, say you're interested in post-colonialism, right? That's great. Now, if you don't know who Etienne Balibar is, then you can't put his name in a search engine to get some interesting, powerful information on post-colonialism. So unless you've got the knowledge system and the vocabulary, you're not actually going to get the high quality returns from Google. So Google, if you will, has dumbed down information literacy. We cannot put words into a search engine that we don't know. So to find better information, we often have to move between different search engines, move between different platforms, think about multimodality, widen our vocabulary, and understand the really key and emerging researchers in our field. So therefore, what we need to be doing when we're dealing with information literacy is understanding the difference between information literacy and technological literacy. Just because you can use the tech doesn't mean you have anything to say or put into the search engine. And think about the verbs we use to understand the web. So scrolling, surfing, linking. All of this is about superficial knowledge, the stuff on the surface. How do you get deeper? How do you create those deeper interpretive skills? So think about your search patterns. How often do you use the directory of open access journals? Do you even know what the directory of open access journals is? How often do you use Google Scholar? How often do you use Google? And remember, it's easier to read a blog than an academic article. It's easier to do that. The nature of literacy, sadly, is all of us stay in intellectual environments where we feel safe, where we feel protected, where we think we understand what's going on. That's easy information, very easy to stay where you are literate. But the start of learning, let alone the start of research, is challenging yourself to move to environments where you don't understand what's going on. Key. So my goal as a teacher, but also my goal as a supervisor, is to slow the relationship down between a student and an information source. So stop the speed of the Google searching and start to raise a series of questions about information literacy. So what I do is I actually assemble a checklist for every single source that a student might engage with, and I'm putting this in a sheet that you'll see a link to. If you look down in the information section of this YouTube video, you'll see a link where I actually present these questions. So if you're saying, Tara, what is information literacy? How do I enhance my information literacy? Let me tell you quickly, there are 10 quick questions that you answer when you confront an innovative and difficult source. Who authored the information? So who's the author, who's the writer? What expertise does that person have to be offering this commentary? What evidence is used to make the argument? What is the genre of the source? Is it a blog? Is it a video? Is it a refereed article? Is it a piece of journalism? Was this site or report funded by an institution? Think about that. What argument is being produced here? When was this text or article or product released? When? And then ask yourself, why did this information emerge at this point in history? So that's the great contextual question. And the final, the really meta, difficult question, what is not being discussed? What is not being presented in this source? What is absent? I've often said what is not being talked about is often more important than what is. So another key strategy for information literacy that I apply every minute of every day of my research and teaching life is I start reading all sources from the back. So before I start reading any book or refereed article, blog, anything at all, I look at the reference list first. So I know exactly who this person is by the caliber of their references. And I go, oh, right, so they're really bad references, so this is going to be well dodgy, and often it comes to pass. So always remember, look at the back and make a judgment about the interpretation that's going to be there first. Start at the back and then go to the front. Okay, just think about it in your daily life, right? If you come across a bloke dribbling with a weird hat and a needle in his arm, you're not going to believe him. But how often do you read random stuff online from some random blogger and believe it because you don't look at the references at the end? So Google is popular not because it's right, not because it's appropriate, but because it's easy and quick. And we live in easy and quick times. But at university, let alone in a doctoral program, I'm going to demand more of you than easy and quick. You've got to work harder. You've got to find me better information. Okay, So the time has really come, I think, for you to think overtly about information, how you find it, how you evaluate it, and yes, how you use it. So this is not a question of choosing between offline and online sources. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's thinking reflexively about how you integrate the analog history of ideas with the digital history of ideas. That's important. And I think the challenge we've got is that technical competency is starting to mask a lack of information literacy. So this means that students particularly are finding some pretty basic information and they're not drilling as deeply as they need to drill to develop that originality. So let me just, if this helps, one other model I'll give you of information literacy to move you through the stages of information literacy. A wonderful scholar in the late 1990s called Mary Mackin Horowitz developed 4 stages of literacy, like 4 slices of literacy. This is, and I not only apply this to literacy, I apply this to life. And those 4 stages are everyday literacy, applied literacy, theoretical literacy, and reflexive literacy. So think about them as slices, but also think of the horizontal movement: everyday, applied, theoretical, reflexive. So everyday literacies are gained in the family and the home environment. So early oral communication skills, early socialization, they're the everyday literacies. Applied literacies are often the development of a particular expertise, often called skill development. So that's the early days of school, learning how to work with language, learning how to write, so skill development. Theoretical literacy is when we start getting into the university environment, and that is thinking about academic disciplines and academic communities. So that involves both the production and the interpretation of texts in a formal learning environment. So this is specialised literacies, and this does occur in universities. And then we get to reflexive literacies. This is where you start to understand social inclusion, social diversity, the impact of diversity on information creation and selection. It's also where you discuss the limitations of disciplinary knowledge. So interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, postdisciplinarity. This is where we start to engage reflexive literacy. So you assess the strengths and the weaknesses of your sources, of your platforms, and also your disciplines. This is the slice of literacy that is most radical and challenges common sense. You start to consider how media frame and shape the information that you are engaging with. This is multimodality. So as you can see, the point of a university is to engage with those top 2 tiers or slices of literacy. But the Mary Mackin Horowitz model argues that you've actually got to move through all 4 stages in order to get to reflexive literacy. So that means if you've had any problems in those first 2 slices or tiers, then you're going to have challenges at the top end. And that's why in a doctoral program, sometimes we need to do some remedial work to move you through those slices or stages. So if you don't have a good sense of your discipline, for example, that theoretical literacy, then the reflexive literacy, the reflection on that discipline, is more difficult to develop. So intervention is required. The argument of this model is you don't just sort of naturally learn information literacy through Google. Intervention from experts, teachers, supervisors, experts, is required to move you through those 4 slices. So this means you need to be challenged. If you keep doing the same stuff you did yesterday and the day before and the day before and the day before, you are not developing information literacies. You are staying in a slice of literacy in which you feel comfortable. Always remember, all literacies are based on earlier modes. So if you continue to talk with and hang about with people who are just like you at your level of literacy, then you're never going to be challenged to grow and transform. So that's important. I ask all of us, that's why I'm so interested in interdisciplinarity, because all of us are challenged when we engage with different disciplines. That's why I'm not too bothered. People go, oh, look, the arts, the sciences. I'm interested in ideas. wherever they may be. And I want you to feel that too. Knowledge wherever we may find it. And that's how you develop literacy. Challenge yourself, grow, transform, think, be. That's information literacy. So remember, a PhD requires an original contribution to knowledge. And that has to be based on a deep and reflexive understanding of information and how information is situated in your discipline and, yes, beyond it. Only when we understand the history of information in context are we able to transcend it and create something original. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tia.